Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Tuesday, August 27th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We kind of have an in-between point between Week 0 and Week 1 today, so we'll get into, is the chaos of Week 0 going to follow to Week 1? I tend to believe the answer is going to be yes, so we'll go through all the big games and see how it could pinpoint how the chaos could really show up in those games. Then we'll get into Michigan. The NOA from the NCAA was delivered to them. Definitely going to be a lengthy process to figure out what the end-all be-all is here, but I can almost promise you it's not going to be necessarily what a lot of the Michigan haters, quote-unquote, want. Then we'll move on to a couple of the schedule changes that could be happening to college football over the next little bit. It could be a change in the portal window, also a change in possibly when Week 1 starts, so we'll get into that. Then we have a little bit of a recruiting update. It was a huge recruiting weekend, and as we get into the season, I tend to believe we're going to have a little bit less time for recruiting, so we'll get into that today. And then we'll do my top 12 as we head into the season. Thought I would do 12 instead of 10, make it a little bit more interesting. As we head into this season, I'll give you my top 12 for Week 1. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to kind of have a fun, interactive experience here, and that's always good for the both of us. So if you'd like to use that, definitely use the super chat there. Also, you can use gsmcpodcast.net if that's a little bit easier for you. But sometimes it's just easy to click that little dollar sign at the bottom of the chat and leave any question or comment that you have. But let's go ahead and jump in here, and let's talk about all of the chaos that happened in Week 0. Is it going to follow to Week 1? Because there were a lot of double-digit favorites in Week 0, and none of them covered. Not a single one of them covered their spread, and I think it might just follow into Week 1. I know this season has been hyped up as one of chaos and one of craziness, and frankly, I think Week 1 is going to give us plenty of that. But I want to go through all of the top games. There are 5 games that really jump out in Week 1, and I want to go through those games and kind of give you an idea of where chaos could strike, what are the game in particular that definitely something crazy could happen, and where are we going to see all of this stuff from Week 0 kind of follow over to Week 1. And we'll start with the game that is going on in Atlanta this weekend, Georgia against Clemson. Georgia's favored by 13.5, over-under at 48.5, and this is a really interesting game. I think a lot of people going into this one are saying, well, Georgia's going to win, they're Georgia, this is Clemson. Clemson has so many questions from the last couple of years. Georgia has been a well-oiled machine since about 2020, really. So I think a lot of people are kind of writing this one off in a sense. But the reality is this one's going to be a little bit closer and is a little bit more sketchy for Georgia than I think some people are letting on. Because what if Georgia's D-line is a real issue? What if Phil Maffa in this Clemson running game can slow down this game, and kind of like Tech did to Florida State? What if they can slow down this game enough to where Georgia's offense doesn't have the ability to get their hands on the ball too often, and this Georgia D-line that is already a little bit suspect heading into the season is just leaned on for 4 quarters? If they just absolutely lean on him, Phil Maffa just bruises him up for 4 quarters, there's a reality where things get a little bit sketchy. And then you have the Clemson offense. You get that running game going, then maybe Cade Klubnik can find some passing lanes to find Bryant Wesco, to find TJ Moore, to find all of the electric wide receivers that they brought in. They are freshmen. This is going to be their first college football game, but at the end of the day, talent is talent. So if they can figure it out on that side of the ball and get those wide receivers going, then they might just be able to make this thing very interesting. And then UGA has been totally impenetrable in the regular season. Since 2020, they have not lost a regular season game. I believe they've won the last 39 regular season games. So if Clemson's going to be able to do this, a lot of stuff has to fall into place. I think we all understand that, especially in Atlanta, where you're going to be outnumbered quite a bit if you're a Clemson fan. Although maybe it's a little bit more even, but I would bet Georgia fans will 70-30 is probably my rough estimate there. But at the end of the day, Clemson has the ability to win this game. They have the ability absolutely to keep it close, because the way Clemson is going to win a lot of games this year is Phil Maffa is going to run the ball really effectively, and that defense is going to play the defense they should be able to play all year. So it's going to be really interesting. I think it's one of those games that we can look at and kind of scoff at and say Georgia's going to continue to roll and continue their role they've been on for the last couple of years, and a Week 1 game is not going to trip up Georgia. But at the end of the day, Clemson has a lot of things in place, and if a couple of those things that are a little bit questionable right now, if they come into place on week 1, things get really interesting in Atlanta very, very quickly. But moving forward here, Penn State, West Virginia is a really interesting one. Penn State only favored by 8.5 in this game, 51.5 over-under, and this is going to be a game that is going to be really interesting because the reality is Penn State is not going to be close to a finished product in this game. With new coordinators coming in, with a lot changing on the offensive line, with a lot changing on the defense, you're going to have a lot of differences between week 1 Penn State and week 13 Penn State. Doesn't mean it's not going to be a really good team walking into Morgantown, but there's a chance that they come out just a little bit flat, and all of the different changes that have gone on this offseason definitely take a little bit of a toll. And frankly, on the other side, you have a West Virginia team that is very veteran, knows exactly what they want to do, and is frankly going to play a relatively simple game. They're going to run the ball really aggressively with C.J. Donaldson and Jaheim White. They're going to be able to do that, and you also have Garrett Green that's also a running threat at any point. So they have the ability to, again, slow this game down. That's going to be the way that a lot of these underdogs find a way to win, is just slow the game down. Just make it tougher on the other offense to get moving and get going. And this Penn State offense, as we know, if it doesn't get going, then it looks pretty ugly in a hurry. So I do think this West Virginia team has a way to cause problems at the very least. And one of those things, if you have a guy like Garrett Green, you're down to the fourth quarter, only down by 7 or 3 points, you're very much in this game. So this is the one that I'm circling probably the most out of the Big Five, but it's definitely going to be interesting to see how this one plays out. Moving on to Miami at Florida, this is one that I don't know if there's a real upset scenario. Obviously, Miami's favored by 2.5 points, but if Florida were to win, I wouldn't necessarily call that a huge upset. I think people would out there in the national media or whatever, but at the end of the day, this Florida team is very talented. They're obviously an SEC roster. They have incredible things going for them, so I don't think it would be all that crazy, and it's in Gainesville, which obviously helps. So it's going to be one of those things where what happens, what is the chaos potential of this game is kind of the question we need to answer. And the biggest thing here is, what if Florida comes out and wins by 14? What if they come out and just absolutely dominate the line of scrimmage, they push Miami over, and they end up winning by 10, 14 points? I feel like we have to have a conversation both directions, where Miami brought in all of this talent on the defensive line to shore up that group. If that group gets pushed around in week 1 by a Florida offensive line that is going to be a good group, but not necessarily the most elite in the country or even the most elite that Miami's going to see this year, they're going to have a lot of stuff to figure out. And it could be one of those things where we talk about, Miami, Florida State, Clemson. All 3 of those teams could have a loss walking out of this week, and it would be a very, very interesting ACC race going forward. Obviously, Florida State's would be the worst of the bunch because it is a conference loss, but at the end of the day, this is going to be a very interesting game, and this is going to be a game where you're going to get a ton of overreactions. Everyone's going to come out of this game saying either Florida is terrible and Billy Napier should be fired, or Miami is a fraud and Mario Cristobal doesn't know what he's doing. I can almost promise you of that. So it's going to be one of those games that maybe there isn't a huge upset potential or anything crazy like that, but chaos can definitely come for this game. I can promise you. Moving on to Notre Dame, Texas A&M. Another one that, where you might not have a huge upset. A&M is favored by 3 points. They are at home, so Notre Dame coming in there and getting a win would be huge. But at the end of the day, Notre Dame's ranked 7, A&M's ranked 20, so I don't know if anyone would really call that too big of an upset. But at the end of the day, I think when you look at this game, it's another game that's going to have big-time implications when you go to the playoff, because you have an A&M team that is going to play a number of teams in the SEC, and you have a Notre Dame team that, frankly, if they don't win this one, they are walking a little bit of a tightrope to get to the playoff, because I've talked about this on here before. I think 10-2 should not get Notre Dame in. Maybe it will at the end of the day, but if they lose to A&M and they lose to Florida State, I would not put Notre Dame in. So you're getting into a game that has chaos baked in from the get-go, because it has CFP implications because it's Notre Dame. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this one unfold, and I think at the end of the day, when you walk out of this game, whoever wins it is going to be looking at the playoff as a real possibility. Notre Dame is going to feel like we just got to handle business going forward. Beat the teams we're supposed to beat. You could lose that Florida State game and still go to the playoff. And Texas A&M is going to be saying, we just beat a top 10 team. We have a great home atmosphere. We have a quarterback that, if they win this game, is likely rolling. So it's going to be one of those games where, at the very least, you're coming out of it with one team that is definitely reeling a little bit and trying to figure out where they stand going into the meat of the season, and then one team that is firmly looking at the college football playoff as a real possibility this upcoming year. And then the last one, this is another overreaction special. This is going to be as big of an overreaction as you will see this weekend, I can almost promise you. LSU is favored by 4 points as of right now. It's going to be a really interesting game, but at the end of the day, the only chaos that can really happen in this game, because a lot of us think, it's going to be passing the ball all over the field. These defenses that have a lot to fix are not going to be able to fix it in week one. So we're going to see, 63.5 is the over-under. So it gives you an idea of what we expect to see in this game. But what if one defense just rolls? What if the Garrett Nussmeier turnover issues that were happening in fall camp roll into week one and this USC defense looks really opportunistic and they make a couple of big plays and end up putting themselves in a position to win it, and not only win it, but hold LSU to 21, 28 points, what have you? That would totally change the complexion of that team. You would look at USC, I've been talking about them as possibly jumping from, I believe they were 120 in total defense last year to about 70. That would change to about 50 or maybe even 40, because this is a high-powered offense on both sides of the ball, and if either of these defenses can even stifle them a little bit, I think you're having a very interesting conversation. But the reality is we're probably going to see a lot of points. We're probably going to see a ton of different up and down plays and not so great of defense. And on the other side of that, I think we could see whatever winning quarterback comes out of this, you're looking at them as the Heisman favorite, and that doesn't necessarily mean too much after week one, but definitely something that they can build off of. And I have a good feeling that both of the numbers from these guys are going to be pretty gaudy on Saturday, and we're going to have a number of overreactions saying this LSU defense hasn't made any progress, or the USC defense hasn't made any progress, or this LSU offense isn't where it was a year ago, or the same thing for USC. So it's going to be really interesting to watch that unfold, and I have a feeling that overreactions are going to be just all over the place when this game comes around. But that doesn't even include games when you talk about Florida State Boston College on Monday is very sketchy, and one that Florida State just gotta win, no doubt about it. North Dakota State against Colorado is one we'll break down tomorrow. We'll get into all the predictions tomorrow, so we'll break down that one tomorrow. Definitely a really interesting one. Texas against Colorado State is a little bit under the radar, but a little bit more sketchy for the Longhorns than I think some people think. Oklahoma State at South Dakota State, Syracuse versus Ohio. There are a number of games that are going to be really interesting, but if I had to pick one to add the chaos to this week, it's got to be Penn State against West Virginia. It's got to be that game in Morgantown, because that is a scary atmosphere and one that gets very, very interesting. What's going on, Wolverine Gage? Nice to see you. Glad to have you here. But that Penn State-West Virginia game, it could get really interesting because West Virginia knows exactly what they want to do, and Penn State is probably still trying to figure out exactly what their identity is going to be on offense and exactly what they're going to be on defense. So maybe they go into Morgantown and take a loss. Now, it doesn't necessarily change the outlook on their overall season, but definitely starts them off on the wrong foot. So I tend to believe that chaos is going to follow us throughout the entire season. It's not going to stop in week one, and it won't stop until probably the ball is dropped for the national championship. So it's going to be incredible to watch that unfold. I think there's a number of places for this thing to go a little bit crazy this upcoming weekend. But let's take our first break here. And when we come back, we are going to talk about Michigan. We're going to get into the NOA, break down exactly what was said. It was pretty much what was said about 3 weeks ago, and break down how you're not going to get a hammer down on Michigan by any means. So I'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the craziness that could go down in week one and highlighted some of the big games and where the chaos could come, but at the end of the day, it is going to be a crazy week and we will break it all down starting tomorrow. But let's get into this Michigan NOA because we finally got to the point where Michigan has all of the details about what their allegations are and how they're going to deal with it going forward, and it's something that we've been waiting quite a bit for. We got a little bit of a leak about 3 weeks ago or so, and that pretty much told us everything we needed to know, if I'm being totally honest, and respect to all the reporters that were able to figure that out, because they didn't miss much, to be totally honest with you. So Michigan has about 90 days to respond to this, so this is still a pretty drawn-out experience. It's really just this getting delivered shows that the lawyers can get to work. They can start doing what they need to do behind the scenes to make this, get to a conclusion on all of this craziness. But at the end of the day, this is exactly what we knew it was a couple of weeks ago. There's 5 coaches that had violated level 1 violations, so Jim Harbaugh included in that and a couple other assistants here and there. 52 texts were deleted from Sharon Moore to Connor Stallions. If there was something in those texts that was really going to go against Michigan, we would know about it by now, I can promise you that. And then Stallions and his group illegally scouted 58 times over 3 years. He was on the sideline for CMU. There's not really anything concrete other than that. So it's one of those things that we knew pretty much everything about 3 weeks ago, and we didn't necessarily get too much new information. Now, the one little new thing that we did get that was slightly interesting, I suppose, is Jesse Minter and Denard Robinson, 2 people that were named in this, have decided to comply with the NCAA, have decided to just kind of figure out a conclusion for that. And I think that's probably because they both likely want to coach in college at some point in the future. Jesse Minter may be a little less likely if they have the success in Los Angeles they want to have, but at the end of the day, it's going to be really interesting to see all of this kind of unfold. And Jim Harbaugh, obviously, we've talked about this a ton. This does not impact him at all at this point. He's in the NFL, he's going to stay in the NFL, and once he's done with the NFL, he's going to find a seat on Fox or ESPN and just ride out the rest of his days. I can almost promise you that. So any of that, 4-year show cause or any of that stuff, you might as well throw it out the window. It doesn't necessarily matter. So getting into this, it's kind of, I think it's frustrated some people that we haven't gotten this big hammer down on Michigan that a lot of people were expecting and a lot of people, mainly people wearing scarlet and gray right now, really much want. And we're not going to get that, plain and simple. Sharon Moore, there's a possibility that at the end of all this, he's suspended for a game at the end of the season. Maybe they play it a little bit differently and speed things up and suspend him early on in the season to negate the end of the season stuff. I don't know. But at the end of the day, everyone that was waiting for that big hammer from the NCAA, everyone that was waiting for Michigan to get wins taken away and scholarships and all of this different stuff, it's never happening. Don't hold your breath, because the NCAA can't really do that anymore. It's not a disrespect thing to the NCAA, it's just when they walk into your doors now, you don't just immediately say yes. In fact, Michigan just outright said no throughout this entire investigation, and look where it got them. It got them in a really good position where a lot of this is probably going to be a little bit of a slap on the wrist. So Jim Harbaugh, when they walked into his room, he just outright said no. He said he's not going to comply with an investigation, and frankly, if they did, I tend to believe that this punishment would be a little bit more aggressive, and we'd know a lot more about what was going to happen at Michigan and what did happen at Michigan last year. So it's one of those things that everyone wants, justice, I suppose. Everyone wants the NCAA to come down on Michigan, to tear them apart, to tear them to pieces. It's never going to happen. And it's not only because they don't have enough evidence to even go after Michigan, because they definitely don't. But on the other side of it, Michigan's very, very valuable. Michigan is one of the most valuable assets in the entire sport, whether we like it or not. So whether it's, the NCAA or it's ESPN or it's Fox, it's not happening. There's no world where they're coming down on a team like Michigan that just won their national title as aggressively as people all want it. So it's going to be really interesting to watch all of this unfold. And frankly, with all of this coming out the way that it did, it's going to be really, really fascinating to watch all of this unfold over even the next 24 hours. Because as you might remember, there is a documentary coming out around Connor Stalions here. I think today actually is when it's released on Netflix. And that's no accident. It absolutely, the NCAA releasing this before that came out was on purpose. I can promise you that. And it was definitely something that they had planned beforehand. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this unfold. No doubt about it. It's going to be, 3 more months of trying to figure out how all of this is going to end and who from Michigan is going to get hurt a little bit more, who's not going to get hurt. The entity of Michigan is not going to get hurt. Period. End of story. The entity of what Michigan is going to be going forward is not going to be hurt. Maybe Sharon Moore is suspended. Probably not. But maybe they lose scholarships. Definitely not, actually. But the reality is, this is not going to be the thing that a lot of people want it to be. Just reality. It is not going to be the thing that a lot of people expected it to be when a lot of this news come out. And I mean, including myself. When all of this stuff started to come out, you're thinking, man, they went and stole signs. They were on other teams' sidelines. They were using binoculars and things of that nature to make sure they got all the signs. It felt like a big deal. It felt like a huge explosive thing, but we haven't necessarily learned too much more since that day. We haven't necessarily gotten to a point where we can say Sharon Moore knew. We can say Jim Harbaugh knew. We can say Jesse Minter knew. So what can we do to Michigan at this point? So at the end of the day, I've talked about it before on here as well. We can talk about how much the sign stealing matters. I think it mattered a little bit early on in the season. They still won the championship. I watched them walk down the field against an Alabama team that had a really good defense a year ago and called beautiful plays throughout that entire series. I watched them make a stop on that Alabama game on the goal line. So it's one of those things that I understand that it's a really, really tough precedent to set if you're not going to come down on people that did steal signs and did get into this type of conversation. But if you can't prove that a lot of people in this program knew about it, if you can't prove that it goes deeper than Connor Stalions, I don't know what they want them to do. I don't know what Michigan is supposed to get, hit with at the end of the day, because the reality is, if you can't show me that everyone in Michigan knew, if you can't show me that Jim Harbaugh was fully in on this and absolutely was, throwing Connor Stalions and all of his, his group out there to scout all these games, I'm having a hard time saying they should, tear apart Michigan. I will confidently say Connor Stalions likely should never work in college football anymore. I can confidently say there are some people in this group that should be cracked down on. The entity of Michigan probably shouldn't be, because you're going to get after people that probably shouldn't be gotten after. The kids that are coming in as recruits, the kids that are going to come in the next couple of years are going to be the ones that are hurt by this. So overall, you look at all of the stuff that has happened over the last little bit, and frankly, all of the stuff that is going to happen over the next little bit, including that Netflix documentary that's coming out here pretty soon. And it's hard for me to say anything other than we've gotten what we're going to get. There's nothing more that is going to come out over the next little bit that is going to satisfy anyone that wants this hammer dropped on Michigan or wants Michigan to be buried by this. It's not going to happen. Plain and simple. It's just not something that's on the horizon. It's not something they can even justify doing, because the reality is, from what I've seen, there's nothing that really tears apart this program and makes me think that Connor Stalions was not working on his own. Now, there's a theory in my mind that it would be crazy if he was, but at the end of the day, there is a little bit of crazy there. So I do think it's going to be really interesting to watch this unfold, and obviously I will be watching that Netflix documentary and see what it says. I don't think it's going to be nearly as interesting and nearly as deep as some people want it to be. But at the end of the day, this is one of those issues that, frankly, it was probably over a couple of months ago. This is just another step in the process to put it behind us more than anything else. And the whole crowd that, was waiting for that big time punishment to come down on Sharon Moore in Michigan and Michigan to be hurt for years to come, that's just not happening. Plain and simple, is not something that's going to come, and it's something that, you can wish for all you want, but I wouldn't hold your breath by any means, because the NCAA is not going to hurt the entity of Michigan any further than they have to, and especially ESPN and Fox are not going to do that. So it's going to be really interesting to watch. There's no two ways about that. There's one of those things that we will absolutely continue to talk about as we get into this stuff, but overall, there's just not a lot here. There's not a lot of juice in since it really broke. There's been a couple of little things here over the last little bit that have been interesting to watch unfold, and definitely there will be stuff that we'll break down on the show, but at the end of the day, the NCAA is not going to get Michigan for much. They're not going to tear them apart. They're not going to tear them down. They're not going to strip scholarships or wins or the championship especially. They're not going to do any of that. At most, it'll be a little bit of a fine from Michigan to the NCAA, and that'll probably be the end of it, if I'm being totally honest. So it's one of those things that, we can talk about this ad nauseum. We can go all day about, what happened in Michigan, how much it played a part and how much it didn't, and all of that type of stuff. At the end of the day, I'm going to deal with the stuff that's right in front of me, and that's this investigation. And frankly, it's not much, if I'm being totally honest. So I think Michigan's going to be more than fine coming out of this. I don't think it's going to be a big deal by any means, and I think we'll figure out in 90 days exactly what's going to happen in terms of Sharon Moore in this program, but I'm expecting nothing more than a little bit of a fine, and then they'll move forward with their day. So definitely a really interesting story, and one that seems to be coming to a close here pretty soon, but we'll definitely follow it throughout, and if something drastic changes, then we'll absolutely update you. But let's get to our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to break down some of these schedule changes coming for college football. A portal change could be coming. The entire season could be shifting forward. So we'll talk about that right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about the craziness going on over at Michigan, and frankly, I don't think it's going to be quite as crazy as people want. I don't think that hammer, excuse me, I don't think that hammer is going to come down on Michigan the way that everyone wants it to. So that'll definitely be something very interesting to watch, but at the end of the day, let's move forward to some of these schedule changes that could be coming to college football here pretty soon, and it's going to be really interesting to watch a lot of these be put in effect, and it's going to be awesome to see the effects of them because a lot of them I don't necessarily love. I'll be totally honest with you, but let's jump into this. And one of the biggest things that has unfolded over the last little bit is, as we know, with the college football playoff unfolding during the month of December, there's a little bit of overlap between the NCAA and the NFL when it comes to the college football playoff, and there's been some conversations behind closed doors to try to kind of fix that problem, to try to maybe even move the season up a little bit, to kind of combat the NFL just a little bit. So this is a very interesting conversation. When you talk about week 0, it's always that week where you get a little bit, but not the whole thing, and then week 1, we really jump in, and obviously that's what we're looking forward to this upcoming week. But what if it moved forward a week? What if week 0 what if week 1 was week 0? What if everything was just pushed back just a little bit, and conference championships happened not on Thanksgiving weekend was conference championship weekend, not, rivalry weekend, and everything was just shifted back just a little bit. It would make it easier with the battle with the NFL on that Saturday. I believe it's the first round matchup. There's a couple on Saturday that will combat with some NFL games that day as well. So it's an interesting conversation, and it's one of those things that definitely is going to be a big topic as we go forward, because there are a lot of people making decisions that maybe shouldn't be in that position. But at the end of the day, let's talk about why this is something that they just need to fight against, plain and simple. And this is something that, frankly, can't happen to college football. And it's as simple as we've been sitting back for so long and letting the NFL just kind of take up all the real estate they want. And Saturdays in December, you're more than welcome to have them. And all of that stuff, we've just been kind of handing that to them. it's time at some point to fight back. And I understand that a lot of people are going to watch that NFL game. I understand that there are going to be people that are turned away from the college football playoff to watch the Raiders play the Chiefs for whatever reason. But at the end of the day, that is going to happen. There's no doubt about that. The NFL is one of the most powerful entities in the entire country, especially in the world of sports, and they're going to dominate you in terms of viewership. There's no doubt about that. The thing is, that doesn't necessarily matter. That's not the end-all be-all in what makes a successful product and what makes a healthy sport. So at the end of the day, I could care less if there's a little bit less viewership on that certain Saturday because the NFL is playing. It's a Saturday, and it's meant to be on that Saturday, and Saturdays are the lifeblood of the sport. The idea that we would even think about moving off of it for the NFL is outright insane to me. And all of this obviously plays into TV networks, and they will be a huge part of this conversation, whether it's ESPN or it's Fox or it's CBS with the NFL. But at the end of the day, this needs to be more than need to be about more, It needs to be about more than money. It needs to be about the sport as a whole. And the sport, plain and simple, needs to stay around this time of year. It doesn't need to move forward. It doesn't need to be moved around. It doesn't need to be shifted so the NFL can get their own little day, their own Saturday in December. They don't need Saturday. They have Sunday. They have it all year, and they dominate them every single Saturday. So at the end of the day, when we talk about going forward in all of this, and CBS and ESPN and the NFL and college football, all of them are going to be having conversations around this and trying to figure out what the best way forward is. And you obviously don't want the NFL and the college football playoff to overlap in a ton of different ways. If it's one weekend, and if you lose a little bit of viewership on that certain Saturday, I don't see what the problem is. I really don't. And I understand, week 0 is something that a lot of people are into or are not into, and I'm kind of on the fence as well. And I think having more games on that weekend would be more than fine. It doesn't mean you have to change it for the NFL. It doesn't mean you have to move around your entire scheduling so the NFL can get the viewers that, frankly, they're going to get anyway. So overall, I understand it's all about viewership. I understand it's all about money. I understand it's all about what the revenue dollars say. But at the end of the day, we have to, at a certain point, put our foot down and say, no, the tradition of the sport is more important than your dollars. The tradition of Saturday is more important than whatever the NFL has to bring. So this is one of those things that is all-time frustrating for me. There's always going to be a battle between the NFL and college football, and frankly, there likely shouldn't be because college football has been just handing the NFL a feeder league for these number of years, so the NFL returning the favor a little bit doesn't sound like the craziest thing in the world to me, but at the end of the day, at a certain point, you need to take them on. At a certain point, you need to say, we're not going to bend a knee because you're more powerful, because you'll get better viewership, because you have more money. We're going to do our thing. We're going to stay on these Saturdays, and maybe we'll lose a little viewership. Maybe we'll, drop a little bit in where we want to be in the viewership rankings, but at the end of the day, we're going to have what makes this sport special, which is that Saturday throughout the year that we can turn on the TV, find college football, and lock in. And that's the most important thing for this sport. So it is a David versus Goliath type story. College football against NFL. It's not even the same world that they live in when it comes to TV viewership. But at the end of the day, you don't have to kill Goliath. You don't have to tear them to pieces. You don't have to dominate them on that Saturday. You just got to cut their foot off. If you can find a way to pull enough people away from that NFL game into the college football playoff game where the NFL rethinks that Saturday, you've won. It's not about, tearing apart the NFL. It's not about outright winning this battle. It's about just winning enough to keep the NFL off that Saturday. And frankly, I don't think that would be the craziest ask for the college football playoff. I don't think it would be the craziest thing to say that the NFL is going to look at these numbers at the end of the year and say, that Saturday in December is not giving us what we want it to anymore because of the college football playoff, so let's just go ahead and just drop that Saturday. We'll move everything to Sunday, and we'll start a week later on those Saturday games. That's not a crazy ask, and it's something that you don't necessarily need to ask the NFL to do it. You just got to show them by us not watching that game. And frankly, that's going to be a little bit tough for me to do because I love just watching any football that's in front of me. But at the end of the day, maybe on that Saturday, I'll make that sacrifice. I'll say, I got to lock into the college football playoff because we need all of the help that we can get to possibly knock the NFL off that day. So it's one of those conversations that I understand a lot of this stuff is a lot more convoluted and over my head than I fully understand that. But at the end of the day, Saturdays are college footballs, period, end of story. And the idea that we would go off a Saturday in the fall for the NFL is just outright insane. I don't care what the money or the viewership around it is. So just, take a bite out of the NFL's viewership. Don't necessarily bury them, but take a little bite out of it and see where you stand at the end of the year. And then if you need to move forward in a different direction, maybe you do that. But at the end of the day, you should do everything, exhaust every single possible path you possibly can before you cut that Saturday. Period, end of story. If you cut that Saturday and move it to a Thursday night game on college campuses around the country, there are going to be fans that are going to be just so mad, and those atmospheres are just going to be a little bit more dead than they should be. So it's going to be an interesting thing to watch. I hope the NCAA and college football in general just digs their heels in a little bit here, more than they have in the past against the NFL, but we'll see what happens, and hopefully this is one that we do not see. The other one that I want to talk about is a little bit of a change to the transfer portal. The NCAA has been thinking about possibly changing the transfer portal just a little bit going forward. And we talked about this, I believe, a little bit ago when we talked about possibly moving it. It's 45 days right now, where you have a 30-day window in the winter right after the season finishes, and then you have 15 days in the spring. And that's kind of the way that it's worked for the last couple of years. They're thinking about cutting it down to a 30-day window, one single window, just to make it easier on all the coaches, make it a little bit easier on the players. But the first idea for when they would do this was during the winter months. They were going to keep that winter month portal and then just do away with the spring one. And first off, I was fully in favor. When I first heard it, I thought that made total sense to me. I thought it would make the job easier for coaches. I thought it would make a lot of things easier. And then I heard Joel Klatt and Josh Pate talk about this on Joel Klatt's show yesterday. And they were talking about the fact that the portal window should be in the spring without a doubt, because at the end of the day, the portal is for the players, and the players will know exactly where they stand after the spring ends, not before. So I think that's kind of where a lot of this has shifted for me. I used to think we could have it in December and it'd be more than fine. I think we might be able to move it to the end of spring and it'd be better for the players. It might be even better for the coaches because you don't have to deal with it during all the bowl games and during all the craziness around December and early January. And also, you have an ability as a player to make a clear and concise decision. Now, it is going to make life a little bit easier for some of the coaches that are trying to put together a roster. If you have a big-time hole at defensive line, you have to wait till the end of spring to fill it. That is going to be an issue. There's no doubt about that. And it's going to make for some tough coaching jobs over the next little bit. But at the end of the day, I think when you put it in the middle of the bowl games, when you put it in the middle of the season, essentially, you're taking away from everything that's going on around it. Last year, I remember very vividly, we were talking about all the transfer portal news and everyone moving all over the place. We weren't talking about the bowl games that were going on during that time, and it made me very, very frustrated. So if you can take a little bit out of the craziness of December, if you can just take a piece of that out of December and totally do away with it, I am more than on board for that. So a month starting early April, let's say, and it goes for 1 month and you can join and you can transfer to a school and be able to play immediately. I'm all for that. I think it makes sense. I think it's something that puts these schools in a better position going forward to focus on a bowl game or to focus on possibly even asking some guys to leave during that winter period during which some teams aren't playing, some teams are. But at the end of the day, putting it in April not only makes December less crowded, it makes everyone on the same exact playing field. There's not teams that are playing games and then teams that have their season over and can go out and recruit these guys all day. There aren't these, huge differences in resources that they can put towards it because some people have bigger fish to fry in December. So overall, I think this one's relatively easy. I think when you look at this one in a vacuum, it's relatively easy to just say, put a month in April. Start April 9th, I believe, is when the spring one starts now, and end on May 9th. And let these kids make their decision. Let them know where they stand on the depth chart before that day. They can make their decision, move forward, go on to a new school. And yes, it will make for a little bit interesting roster construction as we go through the summer months into fall camp. But it will also make the craziness that is the transfer portal a little bit more digestible for the fans, definitely a little bit easier for the coaches and just more clarity for the players overall. So I think it makes a lot of sense, and also we would avoid the Caden Proctor situations of the world where you transfer in winter and transfer right back in spring. So we would have an ability for a lot of these guys to see out some new coaches and to see out some new systems before they make that full decision. So it'll be interesting to watch that one. I think the transfer portal one is a little bit more of a layup than the NFL versus college football battle, but at the end of the day, both are relatively layups to me. If I'm being honest, if I'm the college football or college football playoff commissioners and I'm watching all of this unfold, I'm saying we're sitting still. We'll take enough of a bite out of the NFL to where they'll rethink what they're doing, and we'll be able to be sitting there at the end of the day feeling pretty good about our decision. So it'll be really interesting to watch this unfold, and I think we're going to see some more schedule changes here pretty soon in the college football world. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of a recruiting update. As we get into week one, there's going to be a lot of stuff to talk about. So we'll put recruiting a little bit on the back burner, but wanted to make sure we give you one last big time update before we do that. So stick with us, and we'll be right back with that.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, excuse me. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of these schedule changes that will be coming to college football here pretty soon. Some changes to the portal, some changes to maybe the entire season moving a little bit forward. But we'll definitely deal with that as we get a little bit more information. But let's get into recruiting. There is a lot of stuff happening around the trail as we get into high school football. Maybe you guys have been watching some of those games the last couple of weekends, and some guys want to get their recruitments over with. They want to focus on their seasons. They want to get into their senior year and have a clear mind. So a lot of commitments have been happening over the last little bit, and let's get into the most recent ones. And we'll start with Auburn. They've been on an absolute tear recently, and they were able to steal a player from Michigan, a 4-star defensive lineman, Nate Marshall, from Oak Park, Illinois. And this is very, very surprising for a number of reasons. Not only because he's been committed to Michigan since April and has seemed relatively solid for quite some time, but the way Auburn is recruiting the defensive side of the ball is absolutely ridiculous. It's not just that they're recruiting really high-level players, but this kid's from Illinois. He's going all the way down to Auburn, Alabama to play college football, and obviously Auburn is a national product and absolutely is able to recruit wherever they want, but that doesn't mean this is any less impressive. This is a huge, huge commitment, and definitely one that continues to build on a defensive class for Auburn that is just outright ridiculous. So a huge pickup there, and one that definitely keeps Auburn on the track that they very much want to be on. Onus Kunabani is someone I want to talk about from London. He is all the way from London. He's making his way to Knoxville, Tennessee. So going to be a little bit different. No two ways about that. But this is another program in the SEC that's on absolute fire right now on the recruiting trail. Tennessee's been doing work in 2025 and 2026 classes. They've been doing incredible stuff. And in fact, one of the recruits is doing a very interesting thing over in North Carolina. Brandon Faison, Faison Brandon, a very talented quarterback in 2026, has sued North Carolina over their NIL laws. So definitely something to watch. We will update you on that as it kind of unfolds. But the Vols are on a roll. They are absolutely tearing people apart. And on the defensive side of the ball, much like Auburn, the area that they very much need to improve, they're doing just incredible work. And this is just another example. It will be definitely a little bit of an adjustment moving over from London to Knoxville, Tennessee, but a huge pickup nonetheless, and Onus Kunabani is officially off the board. Moving on, Texas really got some juice this last weekend, and it started with Nick Brooks, the 4-star offensive tackle, 6'8", 345. That is outright terrifying for a 17-year-old from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, a very talented guy. He was down to Georgia, Texas, and USC. USC was pushing very, very hard towards the end of this one, but Texas was able to get this one done, and they very much needed to, especially after missing out on Michael Fasusi to Oklahoma. They very much needed a win, and this is a huge win. I think this is a kid kid that, frankly, is going to be able to start pretty early on during his time. Probably not his freshman year, just because that is a really good room they have over there in Texas, and definitely will have plenty of guys to step in at those offensive tackle spots. But this is a very talented guy, and I wouldn't be surprised if he was on the field pretty early during his time at Texas. So a huge start to what would ended up being a huge weekend for Texas. Staying on the offensive line, though, the 4-star interior offensive line, Javon McFadden, committed to Ohio State this past weekend. Very talented kid out of Washington, D.C. He was down to Ohio State, Maryland, and South Carolina. It was one of those commitments that I talked about. You're seeing kind of a difference in a lot of these top 4s and top 5s and top 10s or whatever, where you see a lot more teams like Maryland or South Carolina or Georgia Tech that has picked up another big recruitment that we'll get to here in a second. But at the end of the day, you're seeing NIL start to really kick in. You're seeing that thing that we all talked about, the evening of the playing field, start to really happen in this recruitment. And obviously, he ended up committing to Ohio State, so didn't necessarily commit to that too aggressively. But at the end of the day, having Maryland, having South Carolina in the conversation with Ohio State is a step forward. And then we'll figure out, where they go from there. But you're seeing NIL kind of kick in a little bit more throughout this cycle than any other, and it's evening the scales just a little bit, and we'll get to that actually a little bit later in here. But Aiden Anding is another guy I want to talk about. He is committed to LSU, a very talented corner, 6 foot, 170. Definitely needs to put on a little bit of weight, but has incredible ball skills and is going to be a big-time player for LSU. And Corey Raymond, this is exactly why they brought him in to be the DB coach. They want to bring in elite talent. They very much need to bring in elite talent, and he's done exactly that. He's done an incredible job this class and has been able to bring in some really, really talented guys. This is just another one in the jump. And frankly, if they put together a really good year, particularly from guys from Ashton Stamps and PJ Woodland, the sophomore and freshman there, they're going to take off. It's going to be an absolute nightmare for everyone else that's trying to recruit a cornerback, because a lot of them are going to want to go to LSU. I can promise you that. And this was a tough miss for Texas. No two ways about that. LSU, Texas, and Arkansas were the top teams, but Texas needs to figure out cornerback recruiting, or Terry Joseph, the cornerback coach over there, might be in a little bit of trouble at the end of the year. But we'll obviously unpack that throughout the season and see if Texas can catch some fire there. But LSU is doing plenty at that position. I can promise you that. Staying in the back end, though, we have a 5-star safety, Jonah Williams. He has committed to Texas. So you didn't get the corner, but you did get the safety, the number 1 safety in the 2025 class. Won him over Oregon, LSU, A&M. Definitely a very, very talented kid, and a kid that frankly might just play right away when he gets on campus. He is so talented. He is one of those absolute game breakers on the back end of the defense, and I think he's going to be an absolute monster. And frankly, it sounds like they got a little bit of help from outside the football program on this one. He is a very talented pitcher on the mound, and he apparently Jim Schlossnagle, the new head coach of Texas that was at A&M about 2 months ago, might have been the one that made the difference here. And that is a huge, huge thing, because the reality is he might just be committed to A&M right now if Schlossnagle was still over there as the head coach of the baseball team. So it's an interesting world. It's not necessarily all about what the football coaches can do. Sometimes it takes a village, and they definitely got a little bit of an assist over there in Austin from the baseball program on this one. So a huge pickup, and definitely a guy that no matter where you see him, on the football field or the baseball diamond, he does some pretty special stuff. But moving on, Bryce Davis has flipped his commitment from Clemson to Duke, a very talented 4-star edge, and frankly, this is really impressive, and another indication of what NIL is doing in this era. But at the end of the day, pulling a guy from Clemson in the ACC is outright insane. Manny Diaz is obviously getting to Duke and doing really, really incredible things, especially on that defensive line. Clemson's the place that you want to be in the ACC, no doubt about it. And being able to pull a guy away from that is absolutely huge. And this guy, honestly, I'd be shocked if he wasn't one of the starters, or at least on the 2 deep his freshman year, frankly. Moving on, 4-star wide receiver Nashawn Montgomery has committed to Florida. A very talented guy, had LSU, Penn State, Florida State all on the short list, but ended up picking the Gators, and it's another indication of something is happening in that Florida program that we do not see from the outside. Everyone is going crazy about that coach getting fired and everything going bad this season, them going 5-7 or something crazy. At the end of the day, a lot of these recruits are not buying into that, and a lot of the people on that team are not buying into that. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this unfold, but at the end of the day, Florida continues to recruit at a level that a team that has a coach that hypothetically could be on the way out this year should not be, just plain and simple. But moving on, Christian Garrett has committed to Georgia Tech, a 4-star defensive lineman, was committed to Georgia about a month ago, and frankly, I think it was a little bit making room in some sense for that Georgia class, because I'll talk about in the next segment, they have a couple of really talented defensive tackles coming to that game this weekend, but this is a huge pickup for Georgia Tech, no two ways about it. They are recruiting at a level that they haven't in a really, really long time, and frankly, they might have not had done this in the era of 24/7, if I'm being totally honest, because of the style of offense they were running for such a long time. They weren't necessarily pulling in crazy recruits every single week. Now they kind of are. They pulled in a 5-star Josh Petty a couple of weeks ago. Now it's Christian Garrett. They're doing incredible work on the trail, and I don't necessarily see it stopping anytime soon. This is a school in the middle of Atlanta that has a ton of talent right around them. As long as they keep honing in on Atlanta, it's going to be a really, really tough battle for a lot of the schools trying to fight Tech in these recruitments. But moving forward, a couple of different intel going forward in the next little bit is going to be a lot around Texas. I'm not going to lie to you. It's going to be probably a very nice couple of weeks for Texas, really a nice next week or so. But it starts with Michael Terry III, the number one athlete in the country. He has gotten a prediction from Steve Wiltfong to commit to Texas, and there's no exact date on when this is going to happen, but I tend to believe it's going to happen pretty soon. This is a very, very talented guy, and frankly, I think could just be a gadget guy on offense or could play on your back end on defense. So he's one of those guys that probably is going to come in as an offensive player, but if you need him on that back end, he can flip there and play just as easily. A very talented kid, and if Texas can pick him up, they feel really, really good about the August they're putting together, and they're going to feel a little bit better about it when Jamie French makes his announcement, it seems. It looks like Texas continues to trend for the very talented 5-star out of Jacksonville. This kid is just incredible. He's outright awesome in every sense of the word, and Miami is doing everything they can to pull the Jacksonville product down to Coral Gables. Doesn't sound like it's working. So it sounds like Texas is going to be able to win this out, and if they do that, they will have pulled in 3 or maybe 4 5-stars this in the month of August, which would be outright ridiculous. So definitely something to watch over the next little bit. And then another wide receiver to watch is Phillip Bell. He is going to commit on Saturday at 6 p.m., and it's probably going to be Ohio State. I feel pretty confident in that. USC is still battling here, as they have been in a lot of different recruitments lately, but Ohio State definitely has the edge, and I expect them to keep that throughout the end of this one, so definitely be on the lookout for an Ohio State commit this Saturday. Madden Faremo is someone I want to talk about because I outright love this kid. He's 6'3", 225, 4-star linebacker. He's going to be a star at the college football level. I think he's going to be a game changer for whatever team ends up getting him. But Notre Dame, Texas, and USC are the big-time teams to watch here. It looks like USC is doing a lot of really good work right now. And if they can pull this guy in, I can almost promise he'll be a starter right away. He is so talented, and definitely a guy that USC needs this type of build. If they can get a linebacker on campus that's 6'3", 225, they don't have to do anything to that frame. They can definitely just throw him out there on the field and let him go to work. So a very talented guy, and cannot wait to see what he can do at the next level. Jerome Miles is a very talented 5-star wide receiver that might be leaning towards Utah right now. He is out of Draper, Utah, so would be a in-state pick, but at the end of the day, he is likely going to be in Vegas for the USC-LSU game. A&M is another team to watch here along with Georgia, but it looks like Utah might have the slight edge. I think a lot could change this upcoming weekend when he goes to Vegas, but definitely something to watch. Another team that is trying to do work this weekend is Auburn. They have Deuce Knight coming in, a huge-time recruit, definitely someone to watch, and frankly, I think he's going to be committed before he leaves Auburn this upcoming weekend. I think another one to watch, Naheem Offord, is going to be their very talented corner that is committed to Ohio State right now. And then Caleb Cunningham. They're trying to steal someone from Alabama, a very talented wide receiver, and one of those guys that if you can get him on your roster, he's going to be an instant impact type guy. So very big group for Auburn this weekend, and if they can lock it up, they're going to feel really good about this class. Georgia also has a huge group coming to their Week 1 game against Clemson, and it's headlined by 2 interior defensive linemen that are the top 2 in the country. Elijah Griffin and Justice Terry will both be in Atlanta this next weekend, and it'll be really interesting to watch these recruitments. I know Justice Terry is also looking to go to the Alabama-Georgia game, so maybe Alabama is able to sway him that weekend, but we'll see what happens there. And then you also have guys like Bo Walker, an elite running back, is going to be there. Usman Kroma is going to be there, a top running back in this from Leesburg. So a lot of very, very talented players are going to be there for the Clemson UGA game. And if UGA can make a little bit of impression and maybe dominate that Clemson team, maybe there's a couple commitments coming their way over the next week or so. And then we had a little bit of a fallout from the FSU loss. It sounds like Myron Charles, the very talented defensive tackle that is committed to Florida State right now, might be looking a little bit more towards Texas direction. That was the guy that it was a Texas-Florida State battle till the very end, and with all of the changes at defensive tackle, especially the coach at defensive tackle for Texas, he decided to go over to Florida State, but with that loss, it sounds like there's a little bit of smoke around him in Texas, and maybe Texas is able to pick up that big-time commitment and get that defensive tackle class a little bit better than it was even a couple of weeks ago before they had Josiah Sharma committed. So it's been a crazy couple of weeks. There's no doubt about that. Recruiting's been off the walls. All these guys want to get their recruitments done before that senior season of high school and then be able to hit the ground running. So a lot of stuff will be happening over the next week or so, and maybe some commitments that we don't see coming might end up coming at the end of the week. But at the end of the day, we are going to put recruiting just a little bit on the back burner for the time being. As we get into games, we're going to focus all on that. We'll still update you in shorts and some of the different segments throughout the show, throughout the year on different big-time commitments. But at the end of the day, it's time for some football. So we're going to focus on that a little bit more going forward and definitely put recruiting just a little bit on the back burner, but wanted to make sure I gave you as a big time update before we did that. But let's take our final break here, and when we come back, I'm going to give you my top 12 teams as we head into week 1. It's an interesting group. It's kind of hard to put together that 8 through 12 group, and definitely was difficult for me to do, but I like my 12, and I'll break it down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just did a little bit of a recruiting update, made sure you guys had all the information before we fully jump into the season and leave recruiting a little bit on the back burner for the time being. But let's get into my top 12 teams as we go into week 1. I'm going to do 12 instead of 10 just to make it a little bit more interesting with the 12-team playoff coming up this year. But it's definitely going to be a crazy year, and let's get into this because the 12 that I have, it's a very, very weird year with a ton of different things moving all over the place. So this first 4 is definitely a tough group to put together. I'll just leave it at that for the time being. But at number 12, I do have LSU. This is one of those teams that is incredibly hard to get a beat on because you know what you saw last year. It was a really bad offense and a really bad defense and incredible offense. But at the end of the day, going into this year, so much stuff has changed. The talent on defense is still, they still have some very talented players, no doubt about it. They are LSU. They made some coaching changes that could be the big-time difference. Maybe Garrett Nussmeier is able to step in for Jaden Daniels and not miss too much of a beat offensively. But at the end of the day, this is a very hard team to get a beat on. I thought about slotting Tennessee here. I thought about slotting a number of other teams here. But I decided on LSU, and I think maybe this weekend it makes me look dumb, but I'll roll with LSU for the time being. Missouri, I do have a number 11, another Tiger team. They're coming off the best year they've had since 2009. Brady Cook, Luther Burden, the entire wide receiver group is back. A very, very talented group, no doubt about that. The defense is the difference maker. If they can put it together the way they did last year on defense, they're going to be right back where they want to be, which is in that college football playoff conversation and be a very, very dangerous team this upcoming year. But at the end of the day, I have some pretty substantial worries about that defense and how they're going to be able to walk into this year and be really dominant. So definitely going to be interesting to watch, but I do have them at 11 for the time being. I have Michigan at number 10. Frankly, I could move this up a couple of slots and feel totally fine with it. But at the end of the day, I think when you walk in with questions at quarterback, there's only so high I can put you. So they're coming off a national title, tons of changes to the personnel, especially on the offense, or the offensive line in particular, and the quarterback position. So it's going to be incredible to watch this team develop. And frankly, I think they're going to be another team that's going to be very different this week than they are in week 14. But it's going to come down to that run game, and it's going to be downright elite. When you have Donovan Edwards, when you have Khalil Mullings, and then you have Alex Orji that can do just incredible stuff on the ground, you're going to be able to run the ball. If they're able to do that really effectively and this defense plays the way that they seem to be able to play, no doubt about it, I think this is going to be a really interesting team throughout the year, and maybe a team that kind of spoils a lot of Ohio State's fans' hopes and makes the playoff once again. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this team develop throughout the year, but as of right now, I'd put them as the 10th best team in the country. Utah, I have at number 9. Cam Rising being healthy totally changes this team. I think everyone knows that, and it's one of those things that when he's on the field, they win a lot of football games, and when he's not, they don't, plain and simple. So definitely going to be a huge thing for them this upcoming year, and I think when you have Kyle Whittingham and company, you know exactly what's going to happen. They're going to win a lot of games, they're going to play really consistent football, and they're not going to hand you anything. So I feel pretty good about this one. I think Utah could even be a little bit higher on this list, very much like this team, at least going into the year, and then we'll see what the changes in the Big 12 have for them. So definitely will be an interesting team to watch, but at number 8, I do have Notre Dame. I think I have them just a touch below where the AP poll has them right now. They obviously have that huge game at A&M this upcoming week, so could very easily get bumped up a couple of spots at the end of the week. But quarterback, they got an upgrade. A wide receiver, they upgraded hugely. The defense is going to be better than it was a year ago, and it was darn good a year ago. So it's going to be really awesome to watch this team week 1, and I think they really do need that win. They need to show that they are absolutely a team that can make it, that can possibly run the table, get into the playoff as the 5 seed, and be a dangerous team in that playoff. But if they lose week 1, all that momentum that they've built up will totally come to an end. I can promise you that. Penn State, I have at number 7. They are playing West Virginia this upcoming weekend, and it's going to be really interesting to watch this team. Penn State is walking in with quite a few unknowns. Another team that is going to be very different in week 14 than they are in week 1, and I think this game could be really interesting because of that. But the story of the year is going to be the coordinators. If they work out, then this team could be a playoff team, be dangerous in the Big Ten, and possibly make some noise for the national title. If they don't hit, then they're going to have a little bit of a problem on their hands, and they're going to look roughly the way they did last year. So definitely going to be a huge year for them, and those coordinating hires are going to be the difference makers. I can promise you that. Ole Miss, I have at number 6. They are the most hyped team coming into this year, no doubt about it. A ton of talent that's coming in from the portal, and it's a team that I feel really good about. I think Jackson Dart has a Heisman-type season in him, and definitely has weapons just all over the field. It's going to be incredible to watch this offense go to work, and I think this defense, with all of the improvements that they made pretty much across that defense, they're going to be able to do enough. I can promise you that. So it's going to be really fun to watch this team. They start with Furman this week, so should be a layup before they get into real SEC play. So it'll be fun to watch that team, but at number 5, I do have Alabama. I don't think they're going to fall off the cliff the same way some other people do, but it'll be interesting to watch. The Kalen DeBoer era starts on Saturday at 3:30 against Western Kentucky, and this team's got to be ready to go. There's no two ways about that. They have to be ready to roll pretty much from the get-go, because week 2, you play a team in USF that gave you so much trouble a year ago, and then you head up to Wisconsin to play a game, which is never going to be easy, and then you play Georgia. So they don't necessarily have a big-time runway. They have to come out swinging, and guys like Xavier Brown on that defense have to show out pretty much in week 1 and then continue on from there. So we'll definitely be one of those teams that I'm watching very closely on Saturday to just see how far along they are. Moving up to the top 4, it's going to be the top 4 that you've had across pretty much every single poll. I'm going to have Texas at number 4, Colorado State coming up this weekend. Injuries at running back are definitely something to watch, but I think they have plenty of talent behind them, and I think when you have a third-year starter in Quinn Ewers, you feel pretty confident just putting more on his plate and saying he's going to be able to handle it. So I think they're going to be more than fine. Quinn Ewers does have to elevate his game, no two ways about that. He has not hit the ceiling that a lot of people had for him, and it's really high, and we'll get into that actually tomorrow, but it'll be really interesting to watch this guy play, and I think this team overall is going to be one of the most fascinating throughout the year. Oregon, the other team that is moving into another power conference, is going to be awesome to watch. They're playing Idaho this week, so should be able to put up about 70 points and just walk out of there with an easy win. But Dylan Gabriel coming in is really, really interesting because I don't necessarily think it's an upgrade from Bo Nix, but it's not too much of a downgrade by any means. It's definitely someone that can run that offense very effectively the same way Bo Nix did, and I think that offense is going to be downright elite. Now, does Oregon have the ability to make the steps on defense? And they made huge steps personnel-wise, but can they make the steps on the field to win all those tight games? Will be an interesting thing to watch. But going into the season, this is a hard team not to like. Ohio State might have the most talented roster top to bottom in the entire country. It might be one of the most talented rosters I have ever seen in my life, if I'm being totally honest. I think that defense is going to be the best in the country this upcoming year. The portal guys they brought in were absolutely huge, and more than anything else, the guys that could be wearing an NFL logo on their chest right now that decided to come back are more than huge. So it's going to be incredible to watch this team, but they know exactly what they have to do this year. It's win a national title. Anything less is going to be a disappointment, and they have set that standard. So I'm going to hold them to it. It's going to be really, really interesting to watch this, but they do have a little bit of a runway to start the season with Akron and a couple other easy-ish games to get Will Howard going a little bit. But at the end of the day, this team is just absolutely ridiculous, and I expect them to be very much in the conversation deep into this season. And then Georgia. They start this week, obviously, with Clemson in Atlanta, and this is the best team in the country to me. It's not the most talented, as I just talked about Ohio State being the most talented, but when you have the gap at quarterback that Georgia does to Ohio State, I think I have to give him the nod. I think Carson Beck is the best quarterback in the country, and I think he's going to be able to lead this ridiculous offense this entire year at a very, very high clip. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in that Clemson game. I think it's going to tell us a lot about what this Georgia team is, especially with some of the running back troubles they have, which we'll get into tomorrow, when we'll break down this entire game. But at the end of the day, they got to be ready to go, and I have not seen a Kirby Smart team that was not ready to go. So I feel pretty confident that they're going to be all pretty much just chomping at the bit by the time that game kicks off at noon on Saturday. And I do think they're the number one team going in. That could change pretty quickly if some things go awry on Saturday. But at the end of the day, those top 12 teams are not easy to put together. That 12 through about 8 or 9 is a very interesting group that is going to be shifting around quite a bit this upcoming season. But at the end of the day, that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport you could want. So anything you need in the world of sports, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you tomorrow for some breakdowns of week 1.